In this lecture, we will be talking about exchange rates in long run. We will try to understand how or these exchange rates are determined in an extremely long period of time. In economics, we typically differentiate between long run and short run. In long run, everything is variable. That means all the goods, all the services, everything is variable or changeable, which is not true in the short run. And often long run results can be very different from short run results. In this particular lecture, we will be focusing on the exchange rates in the long run. Now to start with, there's a concept called law of one price. What does it mean? It means if two countries produce an identical good and transportation costs and trade barriers are very low, the price of the good should be the same throughout the world, no matter which country produces it. So which essentially means that a McDonald's burger in the United States should be the same as McDonald's burger in Japan, McDonald's burger in India, or McDonald's burger in China, or in any other country outside the United States. Which means that if a McDonald's burger sells for say $5 in the United States, it should be equivalent of the local currencies in other countries also $5. So that's the idea behind the law of one price, which means price of the good should be same, which essentially can help us to determine the exchange rate. So that brings us to a concept called theory of purchasing power parity, or PPP. PPP stands for purchasing power parity. So this is an application of the law of one price. What does it mean? It means that exchange rates between any two currencies will adjust to reflect changes in the price levels of the two countries. The theory of PPP is simply an application of the law of one price to national price levels rather than to individual prices. So essentially, if we have two identical products, which means that exchange rate can be calculated based on those average prices, but in PPP we look at the national level prices, not the price of the individual product. So in PPP exchange rate, say against the British pound, which is GBP, British pound per dollar, it will be CPI in United Kingdom over CPI in US. And what is CPI? CPI is consumer price index. That's the measure of aggregate price in specific countries. So all we have to do find exchange rate in the long run is to take consumer price index in the United Kingdom over consumer price index in the US, and that will give us the PPP exchange rate for British pound per dollar. Now, what are the assumptions behind this? So let's talk about some of the assumptions behind this purchasing power parity theory, or PPP. First assumption is that all goods are identical in both countries. Second assumption is that trade barriers and transportation costs are low, even close to zero to be specific. Finally, many goods and services are not traded across borders. That means there's not much substantial trade. So these are very strict or stringent assumptions. So next job would be to see how far this purchasing power parity, or PPP theory, kind of hold up in real world. So this is again British pound against dollar. So we are looking at GBP against US dollar during the period 1973 to 2013. And this is your PPP exchange rate. This red line, your PPP exchange rate. And this green line is the actual exchange rate. That means the rate at which dollar got converted into British pound, or British pound got converted into dollar. And we can see that your green line barely matching up with your red line, which means that there's a lot of difference between the PPP exchange rate versus the actual exchange rate. which is not surprising because again, PPP is a very theoretical construction and there are a lot of problems with the PPP exchange rate. Let's talk about some of those problems. So question is, why the theory of the purchasing power parity cannot fully explain exchange rates? And there are very strong reasons behind it. And one is obviously the assumptions. The assumption that goods are identical may not be reasonable. Are Chevy cars same as Honda cars? Though they may be similar, they are not exactly the same. Or say, even the Honda cars that's produced in the United States may not be the same cars as Honda cars produced in Japan. So obviously goods are not identical. They may be close, but they're not identical. Same with McDonald's burgers. The burgers that we have in the United States may be very different from burgers that you get in some other parts of the world. Another problem with PPP theory is that it does not take into account that many goods and services whose prices are included in the measure of a country's price level are not traded across borders, such as housing, land, and services such as restaurants, mail, haircuts, and golf lessons are not traded goods. So you really don't cross or go to other countries to get your haircut. You often get your haircut from your local barber shop, right? So that's why, or you don't go to or travel to another country to have a restaurant meal. You often have it in your local place. So that's why PPP theory is a problematic theory. And that's why it often doesn't explain the reality. Again, this is a theoretical exercise. It does not have much practical implication. When we'll talk about exchange rate in the short run, that will have some serious application or practical application in real life. Now, before we go in there, let's talk about the factor that affects exchange rates in the long run. Obviously, first one is the relative price levels. That means if say US prices are going up and the British prices are staying same, that means price of the US goods has gone up. So in the long run, a rise in country's price level relative to foreign price level causes its currency to depreciate. Why this is so? Think about it. If US prices are going up and the say British prices are same, which essentially means that in US we will not buy many of our products because it's very expensive. So as a result, what needs to happen, there's a decrease in demand for US goods, which essentially means that our currency has to depreciate or lose value. That means British pound should be able to buy a lot of our currencies. Similarly, trade barriers. In the long run, increasing trade barriers can cause increase in appreciation of the domestic currency. For example, if US increases the trade barriers, that means there will be sudden increase in demand for US goods. So increasing trade barriers leads to increase in demand for US goods. Assuming trade barriers are imposed by the United States, which leads to dollar appreciation. So dollar is going to appreciate because of this or increase in value compared to British pound. Third factor is preferences for domestic versus foreign goods. So if there's suddenly increase in demand for countries' exports, often it causes the appreciation of the domestic currency. For example, suddenly Britishers love to buy, say, US Jack Daniels. Okay, Jack Daniels is a whiskey which is only produced in Tennessee in the United States. So you can't buy it outside the country until you are exporting, we are exporting or selling to other countries. So if suddenly say British people try to have more Jack Daniels, which means that there's increased demand for our products, which leads to appreciation of US dollar. And finally, productivity. In the long run, a country becomes more productive relative to other countries, its currency appreciates. And why this is so again? As country becomes more productive, That means we have more purchasing power. We want to buy more of our products. There's increase in demand. As a result, currency appreciates. So general rule is this: if domestic demand increases, that means people want to buy more US products, and domestic means also the US demand increases, and by demand I mean goods and services. It leads to appreciation of dollar. That means the value of dollar is going to increase. And mind you, when value of dollar increases, the other currency, in this case British pound has to depreciate. So anything that increases the demand for domestic goods leads to appreciation of the domestic currency according to the purchasing power parity theory.